They say you are too quiet, too intense, too much. You speak, and the room goes silent. Not because you are wrong, but because you are different. You notice things others don't. You question what others blindly accept. And slowly, people begin to drift away. They laugh together at things that bore you. They obsess over drama, trends, and surface-level nonsense while you are stuck thinking about life, meaning, and death. You try to blend in. You smile when you're supposed to, but deep down, you feel like a stranger among your own kind. And eventually, you start to wonder, is something wrong with me? But what if the problem is not you? What if society just is not built for people like you? The German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer believed that intelligence, real raw intelligence, isolates. That the more deeply you think, the more alienated you become, because most people don't want the truth, they want comfort. And intelligent people, they threaten that comfort. This video will explore the brutal truth Schopenhauer uncovered, why society rejects the truly intelligent, and why your loneliness might be the highest proof of your mind. It begins early on. You're in a classroom surrounded by kids your own age, yet something feels off. Not like you're better than them, just disconnected. While they laugh without a care, your mind is somewhere else, lost in deeper thoughts. Why do people say things they don't truly mean? Why does small talk sound like static? Why does it seem like you're always observing life from the outside rather than living it? This is your first encounter with the quiet burden that comes with a certain kind of intelligence. Not the type measured by grades or trophies, but the kind that questions everything and feels everything too deeply. The kind that sees through contradictions, picks up on quiet hypocrisies, and simply can't go along with things just because that's what's expected. As you grow older, the disconnect becomes more obvious. You start holding back in conversations. You have learned that honesty makes people uncomfortable, that asking why too many times kills the vibe. So, you nod, smile, pretend, because being understood feels impossible. People often mistake you for arrogant, when in reality, you are just exhausted from trying to explain yourself. You are not cold. You have just learned that depth scares people, so you keep your insights locked away, your questions censored, your pain invisible. Here's the paradox. Society claims to revere intelligence, yet it instinctively pushes away those who embody it in its rawest form. We celebrate genius in theory, but in everyday life, the truly intelligent find themselves alone. Why? Because authentic intelligence doesn't merely fix problems. It challenges conventions, pierces illusions, and questions what everyone else accepts without blinking. That kind of mind unsettles people. You become too intricate for surface-level bonds, too analytical to enjoy small pleasures without dissecting them, too aware to simply unwind. The price you pay? Invisible, yet crushing. You can be surrounded by people and still feel utterly alone. You crave a connection that goes beyond the shallow, someone who doesn't just hear you, but genuinely understands. When that person never arrives, you start to ask yourself, is there something wrong with me? That's the quiet tragedy no one talks about. The world doesn't teach intelligent minds how to cope with this kind of loneliness. It teaches you how to achieve, how to perform, but not how to exist when your brain is wired differently. So, you adjust. You become a shapeshifter, blending in, dialing yourself down, learning when to stay quiet, not out of choice, but necessity. Because every time you've spoken your truth, it's cost you something. But beneath the surface, the weight grows. A quiet sorrow, a yearning for something deeper, and a question that won't leave you. Am I the only one who feels like this? You're not. In fact, that silent struggle you carry isn't a sign of weakness. It's the mark of a rare mind trying to make sense of a shallow world. Centuries ago, the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer recognized this exact pattern. He didn't just empathize with your pain, he anticipated it. Beneath the surface of human society lies an unwritten rule. Don't think too deeply, don't question the script, don't challenge the flow. Just follow what's trending, repeat what's safe, and agree with whoever shouts the loudest. This is what Schopenhauer meant when he spoke of the herd. The human tendency to surrender individual thought, not out of stupidity, but because thinking for yourself is risky. That's why truly intelligent individuals are often feared, not because they're more clever, but because they refuse to bow to the herd. When someone starts asking why, people grow uneasy. When someone points out the contradictions, the illusions, the inherited traditions no one questions, the group reacts defensively. It's not about logic, it's about psychology. In every classroom, Every workplace, every social circle, there's a quiet but constant pressure, fit in, or face being pushed out. And those who are truly intelligent naturally resist this pressure, not to rebel, but because they're driven by curiosity and a desire for truth. But here's the hard truth. Thinking differently isn't celebrated. It's seen as a threat. Because real intelligence doesn't just question data. It questions comfort. It exposes illusions. It brings to light the very things others would rather keep in the dark. When you enter a room and say something that reveals the group's contradictions, when you offer an idea that hasn't been validated by popular opinion, when you challenge the system instead of following the script, you don't get praise. You get labeled weird, too intense, difficult, not a team player. Take the modern workplace, for example. We claim to value innovation and praise creativity, at least in theory. But in practice, the people who bring up uncomfortable truths in meetings are often pushed to the margins. The employees who challenge inefficient systems are told they're overanalyzing. Those who avoid office gossip or reject forced positivity get labeled as antisocial. It's no different in schools. Students who follow rules without question are praised, while those who ask too many questions are seen as troublemakers. Not because they're wrong, but because they push back against authority. Even on the internet, where free thought is supposed to thrive, complexity is punished. Algorithms don't reward nuance or depth. They reward simplicity, repetition, and emotional manipulation, not intelligence. So what becomes of the truly intelligent in a system like this? They learn to retreat, to shrink themselves, to wear a mask just to make it through the day. Eventually, society gets exactly what it asked for. Brilliance kept quiet, genius buried under social anxiety, potential smothered by years of self-doubt, wisdom left unspoken because it's never invited in. That's the ultimate irony. The world says it wants intelligence, yet only the kind that plays nice, that never rattles anyone's comfort, that fits neatly inside a tidy box. But real intelligence is unruly. It won't fit on a bumper sticker, it couldn't care less about what's trending, and it refuses to flatter egos. It challenges them. And that's precisely why society pushes it away. To be truly intelligent is to be misunderstood, to be seen as a threat, to sit in a room full of people nodding along to things you know aren't true. It's not just rejection. It's a quiet form of exile. Because once you see through the game, you can no longer play it. And once you stop playing, you stop belonging. That's the hidden cost of non-conformity. For those who refuse to betray their own minds, it's a price paid in silence day after day. But Schopenhauer believed this pain wasn't meaningless. He saw intelligence not as some gift to be envied, but as a burden, one that only a few are strong enough to bear. And those who do, they walk a lonelier road, yes, but also a more authentic one. Arthur Schopenhauer was not your typical philosopher. He did not sugarcoat reality. He did not promise happiness. He believed that life at its core was suffering, and that the more conscious you are, the more you feel it. To many, this sounds bleak, but to those who have lived through the quiet despair of thinking too much and feeling too deeply, it feels honest, almost like someone finally told the truth. Born in 1788 in Germany, Schopenhauer was raised in a wealthy but emotionally cold household. His father was a strict rational merchant, his mother a literary socialite who later disapproved of his pessimism. From early on, Schopenhauer felt like an outsider. He observed life with a depth that made him feel more like a witness than a participant, and that's exactly how his philosophy evolved. One of Schopenhauer's most well-known ideas was this: a man can be himself only so long as he is alone. In his view, intelligence naturally leads to isolation, not as a preference, but as an inevitable result. The deeper your understanding of life becomes, the more distant you feel from those who only skim its surface. At the core of Schopenhauer's philosophy is the concept of the will, a blind, irrational force that drives all living things. It's not guided by reason, it has no interest in truth. It simply wants, endlessly, aimlessly, and often painfully. According to Schopenhauer, most people are controlled by this will. They pursue pleasure, status, validation, not because they've made conscious choices, but because they're caught in an invisible cycle of craving they don't even recognize. But those who are truly intelligent, the thinkers, the quiet observers, begin to see the trap for what it is. They step outside of it, they start to detach. And that's when the real suffering begins. Because once you see the world clearly, as a performance fueled by unconscious desire, you can't unsee it. You stop laughing at the same jokes. Small talk starts to feel painfully empty. You drift through social spaces like a ghost at an endless party, quietly wondering how no one else notices the hollowness. Schopenhauer expressed it simply: the more unintelligent a man is, the less mysterious existence seems to him. In other words, ignorance isn't just bliss, it's a passport to belonging. But the moment you begin asking deeper questions about meaning, death, morality, you find yourself slowly slipping out of the tribe. Not because people reject you, but because they can't understand you. Schopenhauer didn't despise society. He simply believed that society and solitude serve different ends. Society entertains you, but solitude reveals who you really are. In time, the genuinely intelligent start craving what crowds can't give: stillness, clarity, authenticity. That's why Schopenhauer celebrated solitude, not as loneliness, but as freedom. Great men are like eagles. They build their nests on some lofty solitude. For him, intelligence wasn't glamorous. It was a burden that stripped away comforts and pushed you into existential exile. Yet he didn't preach despair. He argued there's a higher mode of living, through contemplation, art, and philosophy, transforming suffering into insight and alienation into wisdom. Schopenhauer was one of the rare thinkers willing to say, the pain you feel for thinking too much, it's real. The disconnection you sense when no one grasps your thoughts, it's valid. Your intuition that something is off in the world, you're not imagining it. And that's why his ideas still resonate with those who feel out of place. Sitting in classrooms, meetings, family dinners, surrounded by conversation, yet starving for meaning. For Schopenhauer, suffering was the price of clarity. And while the world mocks the ones who see too much, he whispered from the pages of his books, "You are not broken, you are just awake." His philosophy was not meant to fix life, but to help us endure it without lying to ourselves. To face the darkness, not with fear, but with dignity. Because in the end, intelligence may isolate you from others, but it also connects you with truth, with art, with beauty, with your own soul. And that, Schopenhauer believed, is a higher kind of connection, one that no crowd can offer and no rejection can take away. Loneliness is usually seen as a social failure. But what if, sometimes, it's simply the cost of deeper thought? Modern psychology is beginning to echo what philosophers like Schopenhauer understood long ago. High intelligence often walks hand in hand with high isolation. Let's look at the science. A 2016 study published in the British Journal of Psychology uncovered something striking. The more intelligent someone is, the less they benefit emotionally from frequent social interaction. For most people, being around friends lifts their mood. But for highly intelligent individuals, too much socializing often leads to frustration, overstimulation, and a sense of emptiness. Why? Because the conversations tend to feel shallow. Their minds long for depth, for nuance, complexity, ideas, not for gossip, small talk, or emotional noise. It's not that they don't care about people, it's that they struggle with the form of connection society offers. And that leads to a different kind of loneliness. Not just the absence of company, but the presence of people who don't think the way you do, a kind of cognitive isolation. And that's where the emotional paradox begins. On one side, the highly intelligent turn inward. They dissect, ponder, and overanalyze, building whole inner universes no one else may ever glimpse. Yet on the other side, they're still human, longing for connection, intimacy, resonance. They want someone who doesn't just nod along but gets it. Someone who hears what's unspoken and perceives what's invisible. And that's the psychological catch-22. The sharper the mind, the harder it becomes to find anyone who understands its loneliness. This isn't arrogance, it's neuroscience. Psychologist Dr. Thomas Suddendorf, an authority on cognitive evolution, points out that our brains developed in small tribes of about 100-150 people. Our intelligence was tuned to surviving and fitting into those tight circles. Modern high IQ individuals, however, live in an utterly different world. They process information faster, think in abstractions, and challenge norms. Traits that no longer match the emotional blueprint of tribal belonging, turning their minds into evolutionary misfits. Society hasn't caught up with their wiring, and the mismatch hurts. Because deep intelligence often comes with emotional dysregulation, not due to a flaw, but because there's simply too much happening inside. Picture having 10 thoughts where others have one. Picture catching every micro-expression in a conversation. Picture obsessing over a single word someone said, replaying it for hours, trying to decode its meaning. This kind of sensitivity isn't a gift. It's a weight. It can lead to anxiety, depression, emotional exhaustion. Not because the world is cruel, but because it's not designed for people who feel this much and think this deeply. A study from Harvard even found that highly intelligent children often experience greater alienation and existential anxiety early in life. They sense their difference. But instead of being embraced, that difference is often discouraged. They hear things like, "You overthink everything," or "Why can't you just be normal?" or "Stop asking so many questions." And so, slowly, they absorb the message. Maybe something's wrong with me. This leads to internal conflict, a push and pull between self-expression and self-protection. They want to open up, but they have been shut down too many times. They want to connect, but they have learned it's safer to withdraw. And so they build emotional walls, hoping someone will notice the silence behind them. But most people never do. Even in romantic relationships, this pattern plays out. Highly intelligent individuals often struggle to feel seen, not just admired, but understood. They may come off as distant or cold, but in truth, they are protecting a depth that's been mishandled too many times. It's not that they don't want love. It's that they have learned most people love the idea of intelligence, not the complex emotional reality that comes with it. Psychologist Kazimierz Drowski called this phenomenon overexcitability. It refers to a heightened sensitivity in 5 areas: intellectual, emotional, imaginative, sensory, and psychomotor. In simple terms, smart people feel more, think more, and suffer more. And this intensity, though it fuels creativity and insight, also deepens the divide between them and the world around them. But here's the deeper truth. Loneliness isn't always a sign that something is missing. Sometimes, it's a sign that something within you is unmatched. A mind that sees beyond illusions, a heart that won't settle for surface-level talk, a soul that hungers for meaning over comfort. People like this will always feel slightly out of step, not because they've failed at connection, but because they're wired for something deeper, something rarer. So, if you've ever felt that kind of loneliness, not just being alone, but feeling unseen, unheard, unreflected, understand this: it may not be a curse. It might be the quiet signal that you're one of the rare few not just existing, but truly awake. You might assume intelligence naturally draws admiration, and at first it often does. But behind that admiration, there's sometimes something more uncomfortable: envy. And envy has a quiet way of twisting reverence into rejection. Most people won't say this, not even to themselves. But in daily life, those who think deeply or speak with clarity often trigger subtle, even unspoken resentment. Not because they're arrogant or unkind, but because they unknowingly reveal something uncomfortable in others: insecurity. When you enter a room and speak with depth, confidence, or precision, some people won't actually hear your message. They'll hear their own self-doubt. They'll feel diminished, exposed, or invisible. That discomfort, that's not about you. It's the ego scrambling to shield itself. This is where the Dunning-Kruger effect comes into play. Named after psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger, the effect describes how people with lower ability tend to overestimate their competence because they don't know what they don't know. Now add someone truly intelligent to that environment, and suddenly their illusion of competence shatters. They are confronted with their limitations, and instead of facing them, many lash out. They call the intelligent person arrogant, cold, weird, thinks they are better than everyone. But the irony is they never said that. The ego heard it on its own. Because intelligence does not just challenge ideas, it challenges identities. In tribal psychology, this creates a social threat. Humans evolved in groups where acceptance meant survival. Standing out, thinking differently, questioning norms meant risking exile. So when someone intelligent comes along and disrupts the group's consensus, it triggers ancient instincts. This person is dangerous. They might tear the group apart, cast them out. And this pattern has repeated throughout history. Socrates, perhaps the most famous philosopher of all time, was executed for corrupting the youth. But what he really did was expose the shallow thinking of powerful people. Galileo was placed under house arrest for suggesting the earth revolves around the sun, not because science was offended, but because the church's authority was. Nikola Tesla died broke and alone. Alan Turing, who helped end World War II, was chemically castrated for being gay and later died by suicide. These were not just stories of misunderstanding, they were stories of egoic retaliation. Because when someone introduces a new truth, they also expose the lies we have built our identities around. And most people would rather reject you than reconstruct themselves. This isn't just history repeating. It's happening now. In today's world, innovators, deep thinkers, and seekers of truth are still quietly pushed aside. Not just with algorithmic shadow bans, but in everyday life. At work, they're overlooked. In school, they're called disruptive. In relationships, they're told they're too intense. Why? Because intelligence that refuses to conform disrupts the social fabric. It unsettles comfort, exposes mediocrity, and dares to raise the bar. And in a society hooked on ease and illusion, that's a dangerous crime. So envy simmers in silence, and ego takes the shot. And here lies the paradox. People claim to value intelligence until it forces them to confront themselves. They'll praise a genius in a YouTube video, share a philosopher's quote on Instagram, but place them face to face with someone who sees through the noise, feels with intensity, and speaks with raw honesty. And suddenly it's conflict. So if you've ever been cast out, not because of a fault, but because of your insight, it's not your failure. It's that your presence stirred something others weren't ready to acknowledge. And in a world ruled by ego, that's more threatening than actual malice. So what do you do when the very thing that makes you special also makes you alone? When your mind reaches depths most people never touch, but no one around you seems to care or understand. Arthur Schopenhauer did not sugarcoat this paradox. He did not try to fix it with toxic positivity. He gave a brutal, almost cruel, yet profoundly liberating answer. Solitude, intellectual superiority, he wrote, is marked by a propensity for solitude, not as punishment, but as liberation. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. The crowd rarely understands the individual, and the more profound your thoughts, the more likely they will echo in silence. But to Schopenhauer, that silence was not emptiness, it was clarity. In a world that fears being alone, solitude is seen as a weakness. People chase distractions, constant connection, endless noise. They measure their worth by likes, messages, and attention. But Schopenhauer flipped the script. He said, the one who can be alone and still feel whole, that is the strongest kind of person. Because solitude is not loneliness. Loneliness is craving connection and not finding it. Solitude is choosing peace over shallow company. It's not the absence of people, it's the presence of yourself. Schopenhauer believed that deep thinkers naturally retreat, not because they hate people, but because they are exhausted by shallowness. Ordinary people are like a clock, he implied, always ticking the same thoughts, repeating the same ideas. But the noble intellect is like a compass, always pointing toward depth, truth, and meaning. And you can't follow that compass in a noisy room. So what does solitude offer that society never truly can? Freedom. Not just the freedom to move, but the freedom to think without noise, to feel without fear, to create without dilution. Solitude gives you space to return to yourself, unshaped by the expectations of others. It's in this silence that real thought emerges. Art, philosophy, science, vision. These aren't born from crowds. They rise from quiet. Schopenhauer lived most of his life in that quiet. He wasn't celebrated, wasn't widely embraced in his own time. But he saw something eternal. A person can only truly be themselves in solitude. And if they don't love being alone, they will never love being free. Because it is only in aloneness that freedom becomes real. But this is where real power begins. When validation is no longer something you seek, you become untouchable. Rejection starts to lose its edge. You stop bending yourself to fit into spaces never meant for you. You no longer water down your thoughts just to make others feel at ease. And that solitude you once feared, it transforms into sanctuary, into a forge that shapes strength, into a mirror that reflects truth. This is the brutal elegance behind Schopenhauer's answer. Don't plead with society to embrace your depth. Let it misunderstand you. Let it turn you away. Because that rejection, it's not evidence of failure. It's evidence that you are different. The world doesn't turn its back on deep thinkers because they are incorrect. It turns away because their presence threatens what feels safe, what feels easy. So, if you are misunderstood, if you are left out, if you are labeled too intense, too analytical, too different, Schopenhauer would say, good. It means you're no longer a prisoner of the herd. But solitude is not just escape. It's a reclamation of your mind, of your time, of your energy. It allows you to stop performing and start being not who the world wants, but who you truly are. And slowly, as you settle into that quiet, you begin to see what others can't. You notice beauty in silence, patterns in chaos, depth in pain. You stop trying to belong and start becoming. This is what Schopenhauer called the noble intellect, not noble by birth, but by inner richness. And it's not for everyone. Most will never choose it because solitude requires you to face yourself, and that is terrifying. But if you are brave enough to walk that path, to sit in silence, to feel the weight of your thoughts, to resist the urge to dilute yourself just to fit in, then solitude becomes power. Not because it makes you special, but because it makes you real. So don't be afraid of the loneliness that intelligence often brings. Let it refine you. Let it deepen your soul. Let it become the key that sets you free. If you've ever felt like you don't belong, like your thoughts are too heavy, your questions too deep, your emotions too intense for the world around you, know this: you are not broken. You are not too much. You are simply more aware. And with that awareness comes a price. Isolation, misunderstanding, rejection. But here's the part no one ever says out loud. That pain you feel, it's not a defect, it's a signal. A sign that you notice what others overlook, that you feel what others bury, that your way of thinking shakes the comfort others cling to. The very traits that set you apart are often the same ones that unsettle others. So they distance themselves, not because you're mistaken, but because you reflect parts of them they've chosen to avoid. This is the quiet truth Schopenhauer grasped. It's not about changing who you are. It's about truly knowing who you are. The path of a deeply intelligent soul isn't a straight one. It begins in confusion. Why don't I belong? Leads to realization. Maybe I was never supposed to. And ends in quiet strength. I don't need to. And somewhere along that journey, loneliness begins to change. It no longer feels like a wound. It becomes a mirror. A mirror that shows you your truth, your vision, your untapped potential. Schopenhauer once said, "Great men are like eagles and build their nest on some lofty solitude, not out of pride, but out of necessity, because only in that silence can they truly see." From that altitude, you're no longer buried in the noise. You rise above it. So if the world turns its back on you, let it. That rejection isn't a defeat, it's proof. Proof that you think with depth, that you feel with sincerity, that you refuse to trade who you are for who they want you to be. Take that as your sign. You're not lost. You're simply ahead of your time. And whether the world catches up or not, you will already be free. If you're still here, you're not just watching a video. You're searching for meaning, for truth, for something that feels real in a world that often doesn't. And that alone makes you different. Maybe you've always felt out of step, like your thoughts run deeper, your emotions hit harder, or you care about things most people overlook. Maybe the world has made you wonder if that's a problem. It's not. It's clarity. Schopenhauer once said, "The clearest minds often walk the loneliest roads." That clarity might distance you from others, but it also sets you free. Here at Psyreal, this space was created for minds like yours, the ones that question, that think deeply, that never settle for easy answers. You are not alone in how you see the world. This entire channel exists for that reason. If this spoke to you, subscribe. We dive deep into philosophy, psychology, and the human condition. Share it with someone who might need to hear this. And if you've ever felt this kind of isolation, this quiet ache of being different, drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. Let's keep growing a community for the minds that never quite fit. Because maybe, just maybe, we weren't supposed to.